Welcome to part 2 of my comprehensive Skyweaver beginner's guide. If you missed part 1, be sure to check the links to the other parts of my guide. By this point, you should be very familiar with the game menus and have some initial familiarity with cards after playing with the bot. Maybe you decided to jump into some discovery games and found that you were very quickly overwhelmed by the amount of information. This is completely normal. Skyweaver is a very difficult game with a lot of things that can happen at once, which can be hard to keep track of at first, especially if you are very new to card games. Expect to lose a lot because everyone does at first. In this guide, I will start to break down the most important and fundamental concepts of the game that will, hopefully, make your beginner experience much easier. I will discuss prisms and heroes, elements, and understanding how to read the cards properly. In Skyweaver, there are currently 5 prisms: strength, agility, wisdom, heart, and intellect. The prism combinations are similar to heroes in Hearthstone, regions in Runeterra, and colors in Magic, as they are ways to restrict deck building and reflect their own unique playstyles. Explaining each prism's playstyle goes a bit beyond this beginner's guide, but here's a quick summary. Strength usually has big units and ways to buff those units. Agility has smaller and quicker units that beat down your opponent rapidly. Wisdom is a more defensive playstyle with lots of healing and removal. Heart has a lot of death effects and recycling cards from your graveyard. Intellect has weaker units with powerful effects, and you can do things like duplicate spells in units. For more information about all the prism playstyles, I have plenty of links down in the description for you to look at. The heroes represent the different combinations of prisms. In Skyweaver, you can play or build a deck with 1 prism or with a combination of any 2 prisms. There are a total of 15 heroes, made up of every possible combination of prisms. There are pros and cons to playing with either 1 prism or 2 prism that goes a bit beyond this part of the guide, but I will be sure to review that in more depth in the deck building portion of this guide. To summarize, when you play with 1 prism, you are restricted to a deck of 25 cards, whereas when you play with 2 prisms, you are restricted to a deck of 30 cards. While playing with 2 prisms gives you more options, your deck is bigger, meaning that your deck may be less consistent. When playing with 1 prism, your deck is smaller, meaning that you have a higher chance of getting through more of your cards in a game. In Discovery, however, both players play from decks of 25 cards regardless if they choose to play with 1 prism or 2. When playing with 2 prisms, there are no restrictions on how many cards of each prism that are allowed in the deck. For example, if you build a strength and heart deck, you could put 30 heart cards in the deck if you wanted to. In Skyweaver, there are 8 elements: air, dark, earth, fire, light, metal, mind, and water. Elements and prisms are not related, and sometimes new players confuse the two. An element simply indicates the elemental type of the card. Every prism can play any assortment of elements in their deck, and every prism has access to cards belonging to every element. The purpose of elements is to have synergies between cards of similar elements. The closest analogs to other games is something like tribes. For example, Hearthstone has demons and beasts, and Magic has elves and dragons. Runeterra has Celestial and Poro. The only important thing you need to understand right now is that you need to be able to identify the element of a particular card when you are playing the game. That way, when cards say something like, draw your lowest cost fire unit, you can figure out what card you are drawing from your deck. The most important part of card games is reading, and knowing how to read them is important. Now, I know you know how to read, otherwise you wouldn't be here, but there are some very subtle nuances that can be missed when you're new to the game. You might do something you did not intend to, or might not understand why something isn't working the way you thought it did. But I am here to help you out. I am going to give you some examples of the fundamental card phrasing in Skyweaver. When cards refer to an ally or allies, this refers to any ally that you have, including units and your hero. When cards say something like all characters, this refers to every character on the battlefield, including yours or the enemy's, including both heroes and units. Similarly, all units refers to every unit on the battlefield, including yours or the enemy's. The word card refers to both card types, including spells and units. When a card refers to enemy or enemies, this applies to every enemy, including heroes or units. When cards indicate the highest or lowest cost, this indicates the highest or lowest printed mana cost on that card. Cards that have X cost are considered the lowest. When a card says its player, this signifies that an event will happen to that player affected by the card's resolution. Another important distinction is the leftmost and the rightmost. When looking at the Skyweaver board, there is a left side and the right side. Whenever a card says, for example, the leftmost, that indicates the card, unit, hero that is the furthest to your left. This can apply to cards in yours or the enemy's hand or units on the battlefield. This view is always relative to your orientation, regardless of which side of the board it refers to. The same is true for rightmost cards. This can apply to the rightmost card in your hand, unit on the board, or hero that is the furthest to your right. Whenever cards indicate that you gain mana, there is a difference between the type of mana that you gain. If it says gain 1 mana, that means the amount of mana that you will receive that you will be able to use immediately. If a card says gain 1 max mana, this is the amount that will increase to your maximum mana pool. This is not mana that you can use right away, but will be available to you as a part of your total mana pool the next turn. When cards say other or another, that refers to units other than itself. When a card indicates spell, that refers to spell cards only. When a card requires you to pick a target, this refers to any character on the battlefield. That can be a unit or a hero that can be targeted on the board, including yours or the enemy's. So, for example, there is target ally, which applies to any ally, units, or the hero. Target ally unit applies to any ally unit only. For target enemy, this applies to any enemy, including the unit or a hero that you can target. More specifically, target enemy unit, again, applies to only enemy units that you can target. When something says target unit, that applies to any unit that can be targeted on the battlefield, including yours or the enemy's. Cards that apply to target units cannot be applied to heroes. Cards that have the word to in their phrasing signifies that the condition must be met to resolve that card's effect and is typically contained within that sentence. When a card refers to the top or bottom amount of dead cards, this refers to the topmost or bottommost number of dead cards in your graveyard, including both units and spells. When cards refer to the top or bottommost amount of dead units, this refers to the topmost or bottommost number of dead units in your graveyard. Similarly, when something refers to the topmost or bottommost dead spells, this refers to the top or bottom number of dead spells in your graveyard. Enchanted refers to the character that the enchant is attached to, but we will talk more about enchants very soon. So now that I've walked you through many examples and provided you with many definitions and ways to understand card phrasing, my intention is not for you to memorize everything by this point. The take-home message is to make sure that you really pay attention and read cards carefully, especially because some cards will contain combinations of the phrases. If you're not sure what something means, you could always refer to my written guide that is on Reddit. And of course, at any time during a game, you can mouse over or click on cards to read them in more detail. Thank you so much, and that's all for part 2. Please stay tuned for part 3, where we will get into the core game mechanics of Skyweaver. Thanks for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you think I missed anything. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.